Welcome to the Two Blokes Chatting radio show on 94.7 The Pulse. Music, interviews, news, and, well, Two Blokes Chatting. Now, here are the Two Blokes.
6 minutes past 10 o'clock, this is the Two Blokes Chatting radio show. My name is Neil Butler. His name is Rob Cameron. It's how Geelong spends Saturday morning. Now, Rob, I was sitting in front of my computer a little while ago and an email popped up saying, here is a person you should talk to on your podcast. And I will be having a chat to our next guest on our podcast. But my podcast it's kind of got 7 or 8 minutes for your story, maybe 10 if we stretch it. There's no way in the world you're going to get this full story in 10 minutes. So I thought, let's get this person on to the Two Blokes Chatting radio show. And then the challenge was, you put on the running sheet, I put their name and sort of a short description. I don't know how you describe this one. I went with regional photographer, but I reckon that's just the tip of the proverbial iceberg.
What about rural icon?
Oh, no. It's about the guest, not about us. It is with a great deal of pleasure we introduce Alice, sometimes known as Al Mabin. We've said regional photographer. How does that go?
I'd probably just run with Jack of all trades.
Or Jill of all trades, I think, is the technical expression in the world of Jillarooing.
And a 30-second conversation off-air prior to the chat we're having to find that we have a Keith, South Australia connection, and that fills my heart with joy, even more joy than I had when I knew you what you're doing. Al, the world of agriculture and regional Australia is just a wonderful, wonderful place. But when you've got a camera to capture it, it must be just a joyous day for you to go around and do this.
Yeah, it is a pretty wonderful rock that we live on. It's not one I grew up in. I'll just, solidify the fact that, yes, I'm a Kiwi, so you're going to pick up some accent as we go here. But I call Australia home now and think it's the most incredible place, and just the people you meet when you travel in the country is, I'd need a year to talk about it.
Al,
hang on. We went from 10 minutes to 25. You're not getting a year.
Al, just on that, I was going to ask you later, but let's do it now because we see snaps of New Zealand. I've been there once to Christchurch, and it was just breathtaking. The mountains, the scenery, the countryside, it's got some charm about it as well, but it's completely different, in my opinion, to what we see in Australia. For a photographer, are they both just really good, or is there a favourite?
I actually was never a photographer in New Zealand. I only took it up here in Australia. So I probably think I almost take New Zealand for granted, having grown up there with, blue lakes and oceans and rivers at my back door and snowy mountains and things like that. And it was just where I lived. That was what I saw every morning when I looked out the kitchen window was a lake and some snow-capped mountains. But to go back as a photographer, I think I would see it very different now.
Is that something you want to do?
Yes and no. I don't mind going to visit. It's pretty small. I've been over there and launched my books and things over there, but you can cover one island in a day.
Yeah. But it's still so breathtaking, though. I've got to admit that to me it's different scenery. So maybe I'm guilty of taking a lot of Australia for granted, but when I go to New Zealand, the jaw hits the floor. But for you, you're perhaps the other way.
Exactly, yeah. Like the further I go west in Australia, the flatter the landscape becomes, the more I love it. It's because it's different. It's not what I'm used to seeing through my eyes. And I think that's the fact. It doesn't matter what you're in. Like for the farmers and the properties that I go to, I'll film and photograph at their properties for a few days, and then I'll make a video up and I'll show them some pictures, and their jaw drops because they've seen it through my eyes, and that's what I've seen when I got there as someone who's never seen it, and they take it for granted every day that, that's their backyard.
I think this has been something that's come out of the COVID situation here. People say, we didn't go to Bali this year, or we didn't go to Europe this year, so we stayed at home in Melbourne, or we stayed at home in Sydney. Do you know there's some really interesting cafes in Melbourne, or there's a harbour in Sydney? I think it's that whole, you go somewhere to be a tourist and you live where you live.
Yes.
A good response, yes.
AL. I wanted to put it to you that it's people like you who publish wonderful books and put things on the internet that proves there is a difference between a photographer and someone who takes pictures, because what you just said highlights that what's around you take for granted, but when it's actually photographed well, it's a completely different look.
Yeah, and look, I never referred to myself as a photographer, and I still don't, and I don't talk settings, and I don't, do different things. I think I'm a pretty average photographer, actually, but I do have a very good way of telling a story and capturing someone's life and drawing people into something. And I've always said that, the success of a photographer is not in how much money you make, it's actually in how you have the capacity to stop people in their tracks, to take something in, even if it's just for 2 seconds. Because we live in this such fast-paced world today that these things just fly by us and we don't even acknowledge it. So if someone stops and goes, wow, I can feel what it feels like to be on a horse, sitting behind that mob of 2,000 cows, walking 2,000 kilometres every day on horseback. I've got a really great sense of that from that image. Well, then I think that for me, I've achieved.
And without wishing to compare our feeble work here at Two Blokes Chatting Radio Show with what you're doing, but it's a bit the same with us capturing the essence of regional Australia through the Regional Roundup segment that's coming up later, where there's no great story in the people we talk to. It's just hearing them talk about the passion about and bringing us to their town almost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it is. It's that passion. Like, when you meet anyone that has passion, it doesn't matter what it is, whether you're interested in it or not. It's hard not to get hooked.
Mm.
And being an ex-shearer, Al, you take wool sheds for granted, but photographers can get the right angle and a mob of sheep and a dog and a mountain in the background or a gum tree or something, and all of a sudden the image completely changes. And I think that's going back to what I was saying, the difference between taking a photo and being a photographer who sees it in a different way, and you just stand in exactly the right spot at the right time, and it becomes a magic that you hadn't realised before, even though you'd seen that vision time and time again.
That's correct, yeah, or you go and do things differently to how you see everybody else do it. And I think that's probably my, my tag is that when people see stuff from me, I've shot things in angles they've never contemplated looking at a mob of cows or a mob of sheep or, a mob of cow shit, if you want,
yep.
and make it look good, because I've taken a really different angle and approach to it. And I think a lot of that, for me, comes from being from the land. So even as a photographer, I still have to prove myself. At every new property I go to, everywhere I go, they all throw me in the media box. And they think, oh, God, she's going to get in the way. What's she going to do? What's she going to want us to do here? And then they quickly realise that actually, for the time that I'm with them, I'm like another member of staff that's helping out. And at the same time, I'm capturing, what's going on their property. And, they go, wow, like, this is really easy. And she actually understands it. And, we don't have to do things twice because they just capture it as they go because I fit in.
So let's wind the clock back. I think I'm right in saying you're in your mid-30s. So let's go back 25 years. You're living in New Zealand. It's a long way to where you are now. Take us through the journey a bit.
Yeah, I guess if you'd asked me back then, would this be where I'd end up, I would have just laughed at you. I never thought I would write one book, let alone 5. But
be on the Two Blokes Chatting Radio Show, that sort of thing.
That sort of
Pardon?
thing.
Or be on the Two Blokes Chatting Radio Show, that sort of thing. Like, yeah. you wouldn't have guessed that 25 years ago.
Never would have come to mind, no. I guess it probably goes back to when I was 15. I had an accident off a horse and I spent quite a bit of time in a coma, and I was resuscitated 3 times and had to learn to walk and talk was the short of it again, and the prognosis for me was pretty dire. I was supposed to turn out a cabbage, and I guess when you get another opportunity at life, you realise that it's really short, and I decided that from then on I was going to make the most of it. So I've lived a pretty hectic life since and taken every opportunity and always said yes. And then I saw an ad for a job in Australia on a station, and so I applied for it from New Zealand, and I happened to get the job, so I moved over here, and I actually worked at Yawardress Station, which coincidentally is where the 18,000 cattle that Tom Brinkworth purchased ended up 10 years later when I, ended up on this big cattle drive. So I worked for the property for a while, and then I ended up breaking my leg, and the long and the short of it saw me sort of end my life as a person working on the land with my dogs and, chasing sheep and mustering cattle. And I ended up in more of the corporate side of things in the animal health industry. And look, that was fantastic. Like, I'm a true believer of everything happens for a reason, and these stepping stones, led me to learn a set of business skills that were second to none. And I worked all over the world and had, wonderful bosses that just, let me test and measure any crazy idea I came up with. And they were pretty much always a great success. And so then I was able to take, those skills and learnings and apply it to starting my own business, which, I quit my job, and I was walking along the street, pretty naive, I think, at the time, and I didn't even have a car or a phone or a laptop, so I had to give it all back to the company, and I saw a camera shop, and I walked in the door and I said to the bloke, I'd like you to sell me the most expensive camera money can buy. I just had this good payout, and he sort of looked at me and said, oh yeah, what do you shoot with now? And I said, oh, I've never owned a camera. And he was like, right, well, what are you going to do with it? And I said, well, I'm thinking about becoming a professional photographer. And he just laughed at me.
and sold you an iPhone.
The connection with Keith, the name Brinkworth, the photography is the key part of your life, but the characters of agriculture in Australia, and he's certainly one of the more interesting ones, you can't really capture that on film, but is an important essence of you creating, if you like, the images on photograph to also capture the character of these people you're working with?
Absolutely, and often for me it comes with time, right? The more time I spent with these people, the more they let their guard down, the more they realised, I was just one of them and they could have a yarn with me, and I wasn't sort of in their face with a camera, and the more they did that, the more I was able to capture, them in their absolute element. I mean, the picture of Tom leaning through the ute window, watching the mob of cows was just Tom to a T. And his facial expression said everything. You probably, and I really only took that one image of him because I knew in that moment there's this weird little thing in me that knows when I've got a money shot or when I've absolutely, nailed my capture, and I just walk away because I'm like, yep, I got that.
Yeah, and some of the pictures of the drovers in the book, the craggy-faced, wrinkle-handed old stockman, just a particular look on the face says a lot about the character, and you were able to grab a few of those. I remember I hadn't made the connection with the book until just while we've been talking, and made the Keith connection, and that book I have flicked through, and there's a lot to be said about a person in a photograph at the right moment.
Yeah, absolutely, and it comes down to being in the right place at the right time, and as I said, spending time with them and learning about who they are and what makes them tick. You soon learn how to capture them, and often for a lot of people, I mean, I tend to be a lot quicker at it today. I guess you learn over the years, and so I learn how to get that essence of people in a much quicker time frame now than I did back then with the drove. I mean, you have to remember, like, I just bought a camera. I walked out the door, I went to take some photos of these cattle, and I got put on a horse and never went home. So I didn't even know how to drive this camera at this point, but I can ride a horse and I can see a scene, and so I just had to learn about the setting side of things on the fly while I was sitting on this bloody horse. But nowadays, I can do things, a lot quicker, and I've got multiple cameras, in multiple different angles to capture people, and you'll often get chatting to them about something that they're really passionate about, and you just see their eye light up, that one glimmer, and bang, you've got it, you've clipped that angle with them, which is it's a pretty cool thing.
And I guess it's a bit, again, drawing the comparison, when we're chatting to people like you, we occasionally just, prick a piece of passion and bang, off they go. I guess it's that, as you say, right place, right time, just the right prompt to get them in the right position.
Exactly. Yep. It is. And I think, as far as being someone who doesn't call myself media or a photographer, the real purpose behind why I do what I do is about improving the narrative of the Australian agricultural story and highlighting and giving acknowledgement to the people that are involved in it, who often just go completely unseen. And, they don't necessarily want, some big pat on the back and to be, put into the limelight as such. But it is so wonderful to be able to show what they do through my eyes and have the rest of the world see that and appreciate it. And, they have a memory to always hold on to, forever. I mean, we've all got our iPhones and we all carry them with us and we take a photo sitting on the back of the horse, but it's nothing quite like, what I capture when I put drones and things in the sky and get the scale of it. And to be able to give that back to people as a great memory is a pretty cool place to be.
Elle, I imagine with your upbringing you have a serious love of animals as well. So we talk about the capturing the essence of the human character, but in amongst that there's the horse and the dog and the cattle or sheep that are synonymous with Australia. I suppose that you put as much passion into capturing them as what we talked about before with the human essence?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always about doing it differently. Like with that particular cattle drive, there was 18,000 head of cattle. They were split up into 9 mobs with 2,000 head in each mob. And to you, or to anyone that wasn't there, they just looked like another mob of cattle. So I had to, get to know the people and get to know the cattle and present them differently so that it told a story through the book. It wasn't just a bunch of photos of a bunch of different mobs of cattle travelling down the stock route, So you really do, get to know them and you take on board the scenery and things like that to help to tell that story of the journey. And the same goes with anywhere you go, anywhere I go now. Once you've seen one mob of sheep mustard, you've seen them all, and once you've seen one mob of cattle, but what is it about it that's really different? Some of the work I did, I was actually at 2 properties. I'm up in the Territory at the moment, and I've been at 2 properties the last 2 weeks, and one lot of weaners came out of a paddock that were mustered by helicopters, and the cattle, when they were settling them, so as weaners, they obviously haven't been mustered as much, so they spend a lot more time settling the cattle before they start walking them so that they don't have cattle breaking away. And these cattle just circled and circled and circled and circled, and I'm, right over top of them with a drone, and they're circling around, and the cattle on the inside have got no idea what the cattle on the outside are doing, and there's probably only about 500 in the mob, so it's not a very big, mob of cattle in the, relevance of the Territory. And they've got no idea, and it's just absolutely mesmerising to sit there and watch it. And then, 3 days later, I'm at another property where they mustered 3 paddocks. So as they kept going through the next paddock, the helicopters kept picking up and adding to the muster. And this particular line of cattle had last year's weaner on it and this year's calf being born. So there was cows, calves and weaners. Some of these cattle had never seen man before, especially, the weaners and the calves. And they're strung out for 3 kilometres with one horse in the lead that they're following, a couple on the side and a couple of bikes at the back.
Yeah, that is absolute magic. And I'm picturing here a picture on the wall of your house that's got a drover on a horse, the dog circling, you got the cattle and or sheep, whatever they're droving, plus the incredible Australian landscape. Have you captured the perfect picture yet?
Actually, if you want to talk about my house in Toowoomba has got a 40-foot container in the garden, and on the wall of it, it's got a scene from Africa that I photographed.
Bit out of character.
Just shot his theory out the window, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. in the kitchen, I've got a splashback, a massive big splashback that's a scene from the Kimberleys, at sunrise, which is pretty cool. And then, out in the garden, I've put together this scene from a trip to Africa that was just incredible. So there's, life-size elephants in my garden and giraffes.
Now, because we're hosting the show and you're the guest, I get to ask the question, but you're not allowed to ask me the same question back, okay?
Okay.
So suppose someone says, you've got to stay in the one place, and it would drive you nuts, it would drive me nuts as well, but if you had to stay in the one place for the rest of your life, of all the places you've visited in Australia, where would it be? And you can be as broad as you like, either that house or a state.
Well, I love the Territory. I really do love the Territory, but I think I love it so much because I know I can leave. So I think Queensland would have to be my answer. I live in New South Wales these days in the Snowy Mountains, but Queensland would have to probably be my state. But talking about having to stay in one place, when COVID hit and we all got locked down, I worked out that in 5 years that I'd owned my place, I had been home for 9 weeks.
Wow.
So how's that for someone that travels a lot?
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd call that an investment rather than a home for that period of time, wouldn't you? Or a casual accommodation.
Yeah, but it was somewhere that I could come back to, and it's my place, you could come back to it and you were there. But it was amazing. So when COVID hit, it was like, oh God, like I'm stuck here. What am I going to do, And so I actually, I couldn't run my business how I used to run my business and do things, and so had to really pivot things and change. And I actually just ended up going and working on a farm for the year, which was probably the best thing I could have done. And I drove tractors and did planting and harvesting and all these things. And I filmed and photographed, the whole thing on the way, just for shits and giggles, just to show people, hey, I'm still alive and I still exist, and I'll work out what I'm going to do with my business at some point, but let's just get through this hellhole of a show that, we're dealing with COVID. And it was really interesting because through that period, I put these pictures and videos up, and all of a sudden people were like, well, she's not just a photographer, like she actually does this stuff too. And people were saying to me, oh, you wear such beautiful shirts when you're driving a tractor, or how come you've got such nice earrings on when you're working on a farm? And I'm like, why not? Why can't I be a lady and look good while I do this? It's okay. We don't have to just wear rags. That's not the image of farmers and rags, So it really got people to thinking. And in the end, there was actually a shirt that a company named after me and brought out, which I thought was quite cool.
Yeah, well, it's good that you can't see Rob, because he's actually got a nice twin set on and earrings, and he's got his hair up in a beehive.
Oh, stop it. Let's keep serious here. Al, have you got your next adventure planned?
Well, life is an adventure, right? I'm on it the whole time. But I guess as I was sort of saying, through the COVID stuff, businesses and companies that, needed rural imagery and videos and things for their marketing, weren't able to get out there and get their shots because of all of the rules and regulations. And so they obviously came across me, and I've been living under a rock. I've never promoted myself to be able to do anything. In the past, I've just done what I love, and people seem to love what I do, and so hence I've made the books, and that's kind of how I've made my living. And so these businesses were ringing and asking me, what we need an image of this, or we need a video of that. Can you go and shoot it? Because I'm independent. And I said, well, I could go and shoot it for you, but I've already got it on file, So I'd drag it out of the hard drives and send it to them, and they'd say, yeah, that's exactly what we need. And it got me to thinking that, I've got all of these hard drives of, 10 years of imagery and video that I've shot that never got used in the books, and it's never seen the light of day, and people don't even know it exists. So I sort of decided to put a platform together, which I called Agrishots, which for any of the listeners that kind of know what Shutterstock is, it's like the rural version of that, where businesses can, download and access images and videos that are royalty free to use for their marketing purposes. So that kind of keeps me pretty busy today. I have lots of people that subscribe to that, and I'm out doing exclusive shoots for them for their side of the platform, or I'm doing things that are just generic to be able to keep adding to it for people that have more standard memberships and things like that. So just still running around the countryside, seeing amazing things, meeting amazing people. And I think a big thing that I've really identified is here today, employment is getting harder and harder, and the ag industry will never compete with the mining industry. So we really have to sell a different story. So, you know, the videos that I make of a property and, you know, what life is like for someone that's, you know, potentially considering a job on a station, they can see it through what I produce and really, you know, fall in love with the passion of it and the environment and the people and the camaraderie and, you know, all the other things that money can't buy.
Well, I reckon your favourite eatery in Keith is now a health and wellness shop. So Henry and Rose would be a good place. I would love nothing more to have a coffee and chat about it, because that part of the world I love, and you've got to see so many others. Good luck with your ventures in the future. It's spectacular what you've achieved already, and such an interesting life before and around the photography. Just a joy to talk to you this morning. Best wishes, Al.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
And we'll get you on that Regional 250 podcast, he said, shamelessly plugging his own podcast, coming up very soon.
Not a worry.
Thanks, Alice. Al Mabin there from live from Darwin today, but live from regional Australia is probably the best way to describe it.
What an incredible story. And if you have an agricultural inclination and haven't seen her work, go and have a look at it, because it turns something seemingly drab into something quite spectacular. A good photographer, and her work is very good. So I think she was a bit modest. And well, I suppose it's there is a difference between taking a picture and being a photographer, but I think she's got the essence right. That book, The Drover, just spectacular.
You can find out more at lmabin.com. That's ALMABIN.com.